Franco o Alina pueden probar. Estoy en canal de inglés. ¿Me escuchan?
Can you hear me?
Ah, ok, ya te escucho.
Can you hear me? Okay. Perfect.
Yes.
Go
Okay.
ahead. Go ahead. Sorry. We apologize for this incident. Please go ahead. I continue or should I? Thank you. We apologize. A little context. Thank you. I'm so sorry. I'm part of the Guayú community, of the Guajira community, Colombia, and I was just saying that I wanted permission and asking Mother Earth, who constantly represents us in this community. And our Father is water, rain. And first I was placing everything in our hands, our wisdom, placing us in our hands, each one of us that are in the certification, so that we were illuminated, so that we would receive all the energy and all the wisdom, so that we can approach this certification and have them direct the class of today. I also mentioned the importance that we have as women in the Guayú culture, because that is based on the mother, and it comes from generation to generation. And I mentioned the importance and that added value and the main role that women play in the Guayú society, because it's descendancy. It's the women who bring the ancestral knowledge based on medicinal plants and all the rituals and all the practice that we carry out. And they are the ones who know, and the ones who carried out that knowledge. And I wanted the women from that energy and from the ancestral background who direct us today, and have it be them who illuminate us with that feminine strength that characterizes us. And that's what characterizes us, to take that culture, or it characterizes my culture that I want to bring to you, to wherever you are. And I wanted to share with you all the importance that women have in the Guayú culture, that has its mistakes, but it's important to highlight that fundamental role that women have in our culture, in our Guayú culture. So the reflection for today is to highlight that main role that women have, and each one of these spirits that represent us and that have that feminine symbol, such as Mother Earth, and everything that Mother Earth offers us. And it's through that, through her fertility and her joining with water, is what generates everything we have, water and plants. Each one of these are part of a group, of a generation that is created, and is part of our origin as Guayú Indigenous communities. This one I wanted to explain and share that importance that we have. I wish that today we have a wonderful session, and that we have all the energy from the ancestors from Colombia, but also the ancestors of each one of your territories, so that they can illuminate us, and that we can have the necessary wisdom so that we can share this knowledge with each other. I send you a hug to each one of you. Thank you so much for this reflection. In fact, we've had the opportunity to know a little bit more or more closely the Wayus. And it's always something that marks us, and it gives us that strength. That women give us that strength with a more maternally based or centered society. And that's so important to bring it here, and for us to open this session with that information. We thank you for that. And I know that the rest of the sisters are going to be able to know a little bit more about the different ways of being, the different ways of doing things of the different communities, Indigenous communities, and to know that we have these other ways of life within the Indigenous peoples. And all of this has been lost, but we continue doing that effort to be able to bring it to the forefront. Thank you so much for these wonderful words. I would like to assign someone, a volunteer, so that they can do their opening for Friday. We're going to do it how we want, and everything that we want to do. I would like, who would like to open our session on Friday?
I'll try.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll do it on Friday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. We're going, who's going to present or open our session? I'm sorry, we can't hear the presenter properly, so we can't translate. I'm so sorry. Her audio is muffled. I cannot hear. I apologize.
Hey, I said I'll do the opening on Friday. I'll do with
And
a
you're wonderful. And your
massage
name, I'm
class.
sorry? Your name, I'm sorry?
My name is Esther from Kenya.
Okay. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we hear you well.
Okay, so we have Esther, who's going to go ahead and open our session with the invocation on Friday. And our next point, so that we can refresh what we talked about in our session, in our previous session. This is your space. Is there anything that you want to share from our previous session? Maybe a comment, a phrase, a word, anything that maybe you remember from what we're talking about, something that really touched you. We're going to do that refresh amongst all of us so that we can follow the timeline of what we were seeing and we can continue with the session. Anybody remember what we were talking about on Friday, what we were sharing on Friday? Maybe I can participate. I remember, and we were talking about in our exercise, in a group exercises, we were talking about how discrimination led to even crimes, to murders, and how that could start simply with a racist joke or a racist comment, and that if we don't stop it, it could take us all the way to murder if we don't stop it. So it's a very grave situation of human rights, and that most of the towns and the populations are, or the Black population and our Black sisters, brothers and sisters live that. That's what I can comment as well.
Can I comment?
Go ahead, Esther, please.
Okay, in the Africa group discussion, there was this time we were discussing about who benefits from racism, and some of the points we mentioned were: one, white supremacy, the domination of the white colonialists caused racism in Africa. We also identified people with power and influence, like the super rich people and the super rich corporations have their way in our lives and in the indigenous people's lives. Because of their wealth, they're able to influence all outcomes in terms of education, the medicine, even almost eroding our culture. And then we say the politicians are also beneficiaries of the white racism in their own way, that they are able to wield their power to benefit them. Those are some of the things we mentioned in who benefit from racism. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther, and how we were reflecting in the end about that intersectionality, that violence that we live, and how it's never the same than what Black women or Indigenous women live, even though racism and discrimination is everywhere. And to give it a name and a face to those who carry out racism, those who execute that against us. And a lot of the situations that's visible, but we haven't done much to continue mitigating this situation or these conditions to which we have been submitted. And so it's important to carry out that reflection and how we live it from their territory as well. We are working with Jessie and then Philippian. Good morning to you all, sisters. Thank you so much for that, Yeniling, for that really beautiful opening of our session. And I remember that last session, we talked about discrimination and racism as a type of discrimination, and how through our cultural condition or even our skin tone, our age can lead to this, to us being discriminated. And I thought it was very interesting that when we talked about intersectionality and how it's that sum of violence and different types of violence. And well, a very important point is kind of that alert to this type of different kinds of discrimination and racism, and to be sensitive before these subjects so that we can try to stop these types of racism and violence from reproducing and from proliferating. Thank you. Sorry for that word. Thank you, Jessie, for sharing that part, and how we see different types of violence, and that it's important to have that reflection of how through that intersectional violence we can find different kinds of oppression that in the end is interconnect and come together and create that very strong violence. So thank you so much, Jessie, for that reflection. We are going to go with feed. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. Go ahead, yes?
Yes, I remember that we also mentioned that some of the indigenous communities are not yet compliant with the UN Convention on elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. That is Cedaw, where I know that's the module we are in. And for my personal experience and from my community, we find that this could also be, it's a discrimination from our own community, because we are not yet compliant to the UN Convention of all elimination of violence against women and discrimination. For example, this cultural practice like female genital mutilation and early marriages, which is highly prevalent in my community. And I am actually a survivor of female genital mutilation. That is why I always bring up this issue, that even today, in this time and this moment, FGM is still happening to girls of 12 years. And now, because of the anti-FGM laws, it's no longer, the community is not even now waiting up to 12 years. Some children are going through FGM as early as 5 years old. So these gender discriminations are real, and I'm speaking from experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. And especially because we're going to link that with the session of today, because we see that there is a lot of cultural practices that directly affect women. And that a lot of the times, or a lot of this, is a reflection or analysis that is constantly had because we talk or we always stand behind the fact that since it's a cultural practice from a originary towns or people, it's respected and it shouldn't be that way. And how we reflect on this and how we face these situations needs to be discussed, and how we try to solve them. Everything that happens in our territories and somehow places us in disadvantage, places women in disadvantage. And that is something that Cedaw also talks about, and that we're going to be able to see in this third session that we have. Thank you so much for bringing this reflection to the forefront, Esther. We are going to continue with Fipian. And because I know your hand was raised.
So
Fabian?
from the previous class, I learned about ways in which discrimination and racism can be eliminated. So in the context of my community, in order to end violence against women and girls, it is important to conduct an assessment to know the type of racism and discrimination which exists, so that a proper strategy can be adopted, because now we've learned that discrimination, like women face different challenges. So knowing the type of challenge that women face in each context is important in order to enhance the development of an effective strategy. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Fabian, for that. For these words, we definitely have to consider these situations that women are living to provide a solution. What we commented in the session is that through this space that we have, where the biggest objective is to be able to obtain tools to carry out research and at the same time propose solutions. And what a better way that having it come from our experience, our feelings, because this has an impact on the women that we work with, or the women that we live with, or women in our territory, and how there are instruments that already exist, but international instruments that already exist, but at the same time that we need to dynamize these or inject energy and take them on as ours in our territory, so that this is truly effective, because that's a little bit also about that reflection that women make when they face these spaces where you evaluate these conventions, these treaties, because it's like a dynamic that has been generated from a very long time. But we also need to continue giving it a face, or giving a face to those who don't want to, or to those who have been generating conditions for us to not move forward in our rights, because there is an intentionality behind this, and it's important to reflect on this and place it always in the forefront, to name it, give it a name, because what we don't give a name to, it will not exist. What you don't give a name to does not exist. And that's important to how we take advantage of these international tools, to continue reflecting on this, to continue placing this in the forefront of the world's point of view, what's happening in our territories. A few months back, we had a reflection with some women, and they commented that the biggest oppressor that they saw in their territory were transnational companies that have hurt deeply the territories, where they have not only brought poverty for Mother Earth, but also poverty for the mind, for women, poverty of relations, they commented. And that's also important to continue mentioning it, because a lot of the times we leave on the side, or we leave aside what we are living in our territory, and how we continue taking advantage of these spaces. And we need to write this in our reports, where we have more possibilities to be able to make what we're living public.
Facilitate this communication that we can have from the women, from the different entities, different sectors to them, because They listen to the governments, to the states, which are in power, and then we put some makeup on it and we alter data. And this is why we have this space that comes from civil society to get to people who know this information through these reports. And this is not necessarily to fulfill certain papers, certain depth that they want in the research, but also to be able to send a letter, and a letter is more practical so that they get to know our situation. Currently, this is one of the demands that organizations are having for civil society and women, so that we can have alternatives to facilitate communications. And with this, we're going to begin with Cedaw. This is a bit more what we've been practicing for a couple of days on how they're going to exist different instruments. And precisely, this is how Cedaw was born, to combat these situations that women live. Like we've been mentioning, it already existed as a convention or a treatment of human rights, but it's still seen as something that's empty, with gaps, with women's rights not being defended. Yes, we are human. Yes, we need these spaces to be recognized, but there are other situations it put us in disadvantage, and this is why we need to be responsible for this, to be able to have our rights being exercised. So this is why we start creating these principles. A bit here about through the initiative. Well, precisely from the committee of women, this is how this idea was born, of being able to propose a convention that speaks about the women's rights. And this was getting more in depth in a conference, a meeting that they had in Mexico, like we saw in our first session, to be able to discuss and be able to speak about trying to get what was possible in Cedaw was something that was very representative for all women. And we spoke about the importance of being able to position an article to speak precisely about that discrimination. Some women with whom we had the talks and who were promoting Cedaw were talking about living discrimination and racism within this convention. And it was there because there was already another convention that talked about racism. And they saw that there was this advantage because racism and discrimination have similar roots, but at the same time they have very different connotations. Nonetheless, they were not left within the document. Finally, this was approved in 1981, 1979, sorry, after it was built. The United Nations was built, and we feel that we're talking about 20 years where we had to wait to actually have women's convention to speak specifically of their rights. So this is also important to mention and rescue how the United Nations was built when in a society was very male dominant, and it denounced women's rights, and they were denying also what women were living. Finally, those also came in 1981, and it has been approved at the moment by 180 countries. Currently, there are more than 189 countries who has approved this convention. I would like to ask, in your countries, has this convention been approved in your countries? Raise your hands if it has been approved. Is Cedaw approved in your countries? By show of hands? Yes, no? Raise your hands if you know, if you don't know. Approved and ratified. In the countries from Africa and Asia, is the Cedaw approved? Is it ratified in your countries? And if not, it also could be left as a homework to find out. What we have here is that it has not been approved in the United States, being a country where discrimination is very strong, a country where they are they have a bit of all the countries represented within them, where, where they have different cultures, women from different cultures. It's a country that still has not ratified the Cedaw Convention. And if I remember properly, I'm forgetting another country where there is a war right now. Well, I lost it. I lost the idea right now. But we see that there are already countries where they do not see Cedaw, or it's not still currently approved. Oh, I don't see it as necessary because they feel that with the Declaration on Human Rights Convention is more than enough. So therefore, we see that there is a gap there, and there is a situation that women live because there are no instruments that they can stop and fight for their rights. Also, some of the key principles from Cedaw. One of this is that it's an international instrument to promote human rights. Right now, currently, it is known as the Carta Magna for Women because there is no convention that speaks specifically or explicitly of human rights of women. There are other conventions like children's rights or with women with conventions for disabilities, but there is none in spite of 40 years of its approval, another instrument that speaks about women's rights. Another principle is that we have this convention that establishes three key principles that we talk about: substantive equality, we talk about non-discrimination, and we talk about the state responsibility, which are three key principles, precisely because there was, or there is, I'm sorry, certain conventions that speak about rights, but they don't tell us who are the responsibles to make that exercises be taken in their situations that women live. And this one states specifically and makes reference of who are the responsible ones and who are the ones who do discrimination against women. And when we talk about substantive equality, we see that the recognized equality that we have women and men, and among other forms of origins. But at the same time, we recognize that differences, because not all women are equal. We are all different. Even from indigenous women, we are different. Black women are different. And this is something that Cedaw recognizes and reaffirms that importance of being equal to these situations. Also, when we talk about substantive equality, we are referring to the state being able to correct the situations that put in disadvantage women. And this is important because that Cedaw talks about equality, corrective equality, or results-wise, or results-based. And when we talk about corrective equality, we're talking about probably there are public policies or laws or activities that can be situations that can generate by the government in power, and at the same time can be able to promote certain discriminations. And it is important to be able to correct those actions that are taking place in those countries. And this is why we talk about that a corrective equality or by results based. We also say as a third point that when we talk about equality, substantive equality, that is not always, when we're talking about discrimination, is that governments and states can see what's happening, but how from Cedaw it talk about that substantive equality so that the people in power can establish that equality and what to do within institutions. So this is one of the principles that we also talk about within Cedaw. And we talk about also equality, substantive equality. We talk about on how we Cedaw sees it, to talk about, it is important to talk about equal opportunities. When we talk about the substantive equality, that makes reference to equality of opportunities, that we all should have, men and women together, and also to access to all rights and all opportunities that we have. And when we talk about this equality, we're also talking about results and benefits. And when we talk about this, we are referring to be used as reference that all policies, public policies, or that everything that's being developed in our countries actually has an impact in women. That it has that impact that we want, because even though we know that it's very complicated to get, but that when we talk about this equality, we're talking about reference to this. Well, let's talk a little bit, let's delve a little bit about the content of Cedaw. Some of you already have it in the platform in Moodle. And this is where you can download it as well. And we're going to be talking about bit by bit on how Cedaw is worked out. And so now we're going to find different articles. We're talking about 30 articles. And we talks about what referred to by discrimination, what is the role that the state has to have, and what this convention placing. There's articles that makes about women's rights. It talks about the committee's role. So we're gonna go in bit by bit discussing about it all. And so the first part in the preamble, it makes a reference on why it's important to have Cedaw, why why it's important to talk about women's rights, and why it's important to also put them in a convention, international convention, where we're talking about rights for women from Guatemala, for women from Asia, but we're talking about referencing to the human rights of all women in the world. So it makes reference in this part of the preamble. In the first article, it makes a reference on the importance of naming and give a concept for what we're referring to into discrimination. So what do we refer to when we talk about discrimination? And this is very important for Cedaw because now we have a concept about this discrimination. I would like someone to be able to read this first article, which is the first center of the convention. Can somebody read this for us?
Okay, should I read it? But it will be in English. Should I read it? But it will be in English.
There's no problem. You can read it in English.
For the purpose of the present convention, the term discrimination against women shall mean any distinction, exclusion, or restriction made on the basis of sex, which has the effect or purpose of impairing or nullifying the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise by women, irrespective of their marital status, on a basis of equality of men and women, of human right and fundamental freedom in the political, economic, social, cultural, civic, or any other fields.
Thank you very much. Here we find out how important this article is because it establishes the different ways that we talk about discrimination. And here we can start inviting to analyze a bit more this article. And it talks about how in some moments there is a discrimination because by distinction. And when we talk about distinction, we might be talking about or our ways of thinking, of being, by the color of our skin, by the way we speak, or for how we are in our territories. There could be a discrimination in that sense, a distinction based on those actions of how we are. It could also be an exclusion when we talk about, we make an emphasis on, because there might be a way, an exclusion in the moment of practicing our rights, at the moment of, or at the moment that the governments want to intervene in our territories, but at the same time they don't take us into account So this is an exclusion because we're talking about that type of discrimination, or a restriction where we're being making reference to not having that access, probably because we weren't taken into account, and because since we're women, we don't have access to help, for example. And that's where we're talking about that restriction. And at the same time, we're also experimenting a situation racism based on that discrimination because of the ways of operating by the government or by the state in power, or even by the same policies that exist for many years. Or even it could be, we can make emphasis on some practices, cultural practices that occur within our territories that are affecting women. So we talk about these three types of discrimination, and then this convention comes to bring these things to light and make reference to this discrimination against women. It also makes reference to by object or by results. And when we're talking about this, based on object or results, some women talked about in their countries, they began to create policies, public policies, in which after 9 p.m., women were not allowed to go out. So there were this policies that were promoted to not allow women to go out after 9 p.m. So from 9 to 5, women could not leave their homes, and they were not allowed to go out freely in the streets. And this was generating by a way of mitigating violence against women. So therefore, it was said that they're going to have this law to help to prevent violence against women. That it could also help prevent murder against women. Nonetheless, when you start analyzing it from a perspective of women, we're talking about discrimination because women were not free at 100% at certain times, and therefore, even if the objective was not that, I mean, the objective of the law was not that in purpose. Nonetheless, the result that I was given was that limitation, that limiting of women's mobility, limiting the time that they could move around, because sometimes some women could have been nurses or needed to be able to move around and to have different schedules at hospitals, or probably some women, their job was very far away and they needed to leave really early, like 4 a.m. in the morning, to be able to get there on time. But if the law stated that they couldn't leave before 5 a.m., then they were generating a type of situation that needed attention. Nonetheless, we're also being taken into consideration that situation that put women in disadvantage, because we were not talking about violence, because we're talking about femicide. We were not talking about how women could be supporting and access to news for women to be able to as victims to pronounce themselves in these situations. So we see that a lot of what was happening in our countries, we can say, yes, this is a way of helping women, but at the same time, we can see that there's a limitation happening for women. So this is an example on this, how discrimination by object could happen or by results could happen. And it's easier to promote discrimination by object because we know what is the intention of it. But by result, sometimes it's very complex because we need to analyze more in depth to actually identify if there is or there isn't discrimination. It also, this article also talks about how this discrimination can be in the public or private spheres. Regularly, you would think that discrimination is outside, right? You would think that that's what happens. It's something that happens in state or by the bosses or by from employee to employee, and we see that that discrimination happens only there. Nonetheless, with Cedaw, we make emphasis that it not only has to be happening outside, but also it could happen. We could also see discrimination at internally. And when we talk about internally, when we talk about these situations, here's where we can see use this tool to be able to talk about what's happening in our countries. For example, when we talk about the genital mutilation, that is not necessarily, I really do not know a lot about the topic, but I know that, but there is no law that by the governments. So this is happening from a practice, from a cultural practice, and that Cedaw should be able to recognize this, and that it's important to put an emphasis on it and talk about the situation. Probably they're in territories in Latin America, we see practices that are very, here in Guatemala, we still have that exchange or sale of women to be able to have some riches because of the poorness or the delivery. Because here in Guatemala, very harmful practices that happen could be where women can be exchanged for 10 cattle, or women can be exchanged still for, or they can be bought from an early age. They make a negotiation, the parents make a negotiation, and when the girl reaches a certain age, they deliver them. So that payment was already received when she was a child. So these are practices that are very cruel, very harmful towards women and towards the liberties that women have. Speaking about human rights, and these are practices that are also that can be protected within Cedaw and that can be denounced within the convention, because it opens the doors. Cedaw opens the doors where they can be named. And this first article gives us that openness. It also speaks about discrimination can happen in a less degree, where we see this discrimination directly to annul any type of right that women could have. It also makes reference that it could also happen in different stages of a right. So it can be from the recognition of the right, of the exercise of that right. And here we can also talk about how women in many situations sometimes are limited towards certain recognitions of some rights. For example, the participation in policies by women. It's true that it's already established on the importance of women participation, or how there are laws, local laws within our own countries that promote that recognition, but in practice, we see that it's not happening. So we're still talking about that we don't have that full that right. So we're seeing here the importance, and here we can start looking at a certain analysis of certain words that article lists us, and we can go more in depth with it within for our context and what is happening in your territories, so that you can actually see how this convention works best for you. Then articles 2 to 4, we can see that the obligations by the governments and states that have ratified this convention, and it speaks of how the states should create laws, public policies, and programs that should develop and eliminate discrimination. And this will, someone said, yes, it's ratified in our countries, but how far is it being implemented? How many laws are happening? What public policies are occurring? And what programs are happening to help eliminate discrimination? And not necessarily these laws or programs, assistance, a regular that we see that state government have, but also an analysis, a more in-depth analysis of what's happening to help out find solutions and slow control in our territories. What is happening in our programs? Is it happening that we're having more, they're sustainable in terms of resources, of time, implementation, or are there programs or laws that just serve to keep getting fundraising and some type of corruption, or probably these are laws that are just being created, these are laws that are just being created to enrich certain sectors that we talked about, in last session, and how they're benefited from this discrimination. And the more as we are not paying attention to these situations, we cannot have an analysis, a different analysis to combat what is happening.
Article 5 to 16 talks specifically on these rights that women should have. Here we have the center of the Cedaw, aside from Article 1. Here we make an emphasis of what we're talking about, those rights that have been denied to us historically, but others that are appearing. But it also talks to us directly about these articles, what the governments need to do. Creating policies, programs, and each of the articles that are explicit in the convention, and it talks about what could be the best solutions that governments can provide And this is also something very special that this convention can bring from this convention or this model that women used and that women created in order to combat discrimination. Other conventions were also used because in the Declaration of Universal Rights, the international human rights, we only talk about rights. We don't talk about what states can do. So it is very subtle. And while this is very subtle, it'll be very difficult to apply it in comparison to the Cedaw, which makes that reference. So in article number 5, you have a reference on those social cultural patterns that create discrimination against women. And here it's very important to emphasize, because this is where most women are. Indigenous women, women who probably identify with some territory, that we identify with some ethnicity, a way to think or feel that is different to what is socially established. However, what we have been talking about is that in some moments, there are also sociocultural patterns that make women that place women at a disadvantage, or that make women suffer some sort of discrimination, and that probably this isn't named yet, but we need to provide, we have to provide a different face so that we can change that. And we can work based off of Article 5 because it's basically this that talks, and it talks to us about the situation. Article number 6 talks to us about prostitution and human trafficking, and how girls and women have also been discriminated because of these situations that they live, and how human trafficking has affected women directly. Women who have been victims of human trafficking and who have been in these next years promoting the importance to talk about these situations, and how prostitution can be a right, but that at the same time we have to continue analyzing it, and how sexual workers are doing, and they're also discriminated in their territories. They're also discriminated because of the work that they do, or they are discriminated when they want to go to a center or a health center so that they can do their checkups. And also how we analyze further that it may be a right of women, but also women could also be used from this perspective of prostitution, and how women are used through men, or how sometimes we see narco trafficking, and how they've used these conditions of women to continue using them in a sexual way. And each one of the territories will also be analyzed based on how they're living it. Article number 7 talks about this discrimination in the politic sphere, and how women should also be the ones who create governmental public policy. This doesn't happen there's very little participation of women, and that we need the solutions to happen. That is very limited. Even from a civil society, there are still some organizations, some organizations of women that promote certain policies, other ways of doing things from a public policy standpoint. And a lot of these initiatives are placed in the background because there is a discrimination. We also have article number 8 that talks to us about these political representations that we as women need to have. At some point, we also talked about women from other territories, and they commented that they had this political representation. And in countries where we still had monarchy, where the women still have these statuses, it's a lot more complex for women to be able to participate, so that women, where in these countries where the models of representation is through a president, where you only pick a president, man or woman, that could be in the forefront of all the country, or the head of the country. And they mentioned that it's a lot easier to insert women. So there are different situations and how these contexts are marked by that political representation. In Guatemala, from this article number 8, it was a basis to create a national policy. Then that national policy talks to us about the importance of that dual condition, or the importance of power quotas, and that is born directly from that article number 8. And just like the women of Guatemala used this article to be able to reach that law, national law, I understand that in your countries, you are still creating these different ways to avoid discrimination against women. And then article number 9, we see the importance of maintaining nationality. I think that there are current practices and how we work with article number 9. And women are married with men or a person of another nationality, and they automatically lose their own nationality. And they become a part of the nationality of the man. I don't know if I'm being clear. And I had a sister from Colombia, and she said that there was a Swedish man. She had married a Swedish man, and she commented that she automatically was left without a Colombian nationality, and she had to take on the nationality of her partner. And that happened almost in 2015, and that this was something that was already being lived by women before the approval of this convention, which is limiting the rights of women, because they are automatically taking her out of her territory of her country, because it's so much harder, because this places women at a disadvantage. because they can suffer any kind of violence. And if they want to return, or when they want to exercise the right to vote, they can't do it. Or if they want to register their children within their own nationality, they can't do it. And we start a great amount of rights that are limited based on not keeping this nationality, and that this was seen by women as very important to leave within the Cedaw, because we were talking about that. Nobody was talking about what was happening with women, and that we needed to provide a solution for that. And article number 10 also talks to us about the equality in education. And we have seen that women have never had full access to a quality education, or an education that can reinforce their identity. It's something that is education that is equal. And there are also practices that limit that enjoyment or that access to education. So there you start mixing other rights that Cedaw talks to us about, and that other conventions discuss as well. And this education has been very limited to women, limiting to women, because not only is that early education, but also further education has been limited. And we have seen very little women, professional women, Indigenous professional women, or very little professional Black women. So we realize that education has also been executed through a lens of supremacy, and from that white perspective, where only they have these access, and we have found ourselves at a great disadvantage with this. For example, in our territory, we only have one public university, where probably it was the only university where we can where Indigenous women can participate, because our resources don't allow us to be present. And it is because of that impoverishment, that it's through that impoverishment that we are at a disadvantage, or that we are in a situation of oppression. And being that this is the only university, it's centralized. And this university is not in our territories either. And to be able to have access and get into this university, be accepted into this university, we need to have certain points. There are admissions tests performed, and if you don't reach those points, I can't remember if it's 80 points, then you can't have access to that university. But if we remember a little bit the history of our people, where probably you might have to walk 30 minutes to reach a school, where probably education has not been efficient, or probably where education has not been quality education. And when we want to get into that college or be accepted into that college, we don't reach the 80 points. So there we see that there is a clear discrimination to the territory, to the peoples, and especially for women, because women, we have been seen only in those home spaces or private spaces. And so we see that there's a lot of disadvantages, and I am sure that this also happens in your territories as well, because in the end, in Latin America, we all live in these conditions. As a fact, there are statistics that speak to us about that color distortion, and how women and girls are the ones who are the most affected by this, that they represent a higher statistic. And within these statistics, there are references to how many Indigenous women have graduated, or how many Garifuna or Black women have graduated. And they don't even represent 1%. They're 0.5% really of the entire territory. So we can see that there is a huge disadvantage and a great deal of discrimination towards women. We also have article number 11 that speaks to us about discrimination because of through employment. And here women have already visualized the importance of how we need to identify those patterns that generate discrimination. And when we are able, in regards to being able to apply to a job, and not only in that application, but also in how everything we live during the labor life of women. It also talks to us about medical attention and how women should have that access to medicine. All women should have access to medicine, or how we can continue generating public policies that talk to us about this medical access or access to medicine that women should have. Also, article number 13 that talks to us about discrimination in the financial life of women. And it's just that women we could be business women, we could work in cooperatives, which is something that is talked about in the Cedaw, or how we can obtain our own resources, because women, it seems during history that from colonization, from this invasion, we are not financially participating in our society, and that leaves us at a disadvantage socially and culturally. It has left us at a disadvantage, and that here in this Cedaw, it makes an emphasis on this, on the importance of creating other ways and other policies that can generate the right of women. In article number 14, it talks to us about how women, or that discrimination against women in rural areas, and something that we saw in the charts of the previous session of how urban women or rural women had a clear difference, and there was even certain differences, and that here women also identified it, that it was very important to pay attention to this, precisely because women who lived in rural areas had other disadvantages or other issues in access to education, to health, to roads, to financial situations, for example, of their country. In fact, this article, number 14, also led to some recommendations, general recommendations, where we could see, or women could be, even when they were reading this article, they were still perceiving certain gaps, and they said it was necessary to continue creating or strengthening this which the convention stated, and that it was necessary to provide a broader sense from what was mentioned in the general recommendation. And it was actually number 35 of the general recommendation number 35, and that this one was built alongside many women in many territories. This was approved in 2015, 2016, where we do talk about the importance of that disadvantage that women live in rural areas. We also have article number 15 that talks to us about the equality before the law. And here, it's also important to talk about how women should be before equality, or should be in an equal position, and how there are laws at an internal level where they do create that difference, or they create a discrimination towards women. And hence, it's important to be able to talk about that equality before the law, but not just in the creation of these national laws, but also how we see one another before the law. When we talk about, for example, about access to justice, and how we need special judicial systems for women, or that we need that interpretation in order to be able to access justice, but we don't need that interpretation for us when we talk in our own languages before a jury, but how the jury should have that interpreter for these people who do not speak our language, or how we talk about equality before the law when women are judged because of their condition of being women, because this generates a disadvantage. And how women, for example, when they look for access to justice, because they are women, they are not provided that, or because they're women, their case doesn't move forward, or because they're women and they come here to talk again about violence, it's a case that adds to the fire, but that there's no importance placed on it. So these are the situations that Cedaw refers to. In article number 16, it talks about marriage and family relations. That is also very important. How here we play, or these social cultural patterns are repeated, because at some point in other territories, women are also sold so that they can marry people from who are older. And so Cedaw talks to us about many rights that women should have and girls should have, and that are important, and that it's important that we can analyze, and that we can provide an answer to what is going on. And at the same time, Cedaw, as I have been saying, talks to us about these rights, but it also talks about the obligations that the states must have and take on. And so this duality, what it does is to allow the advance of rights, and allow the advancement of enjoying these rights completely. And as long as we know what is said in these articles, and or at least we know in general what the articles of convention say, is going to help us defend our rights. And that's the intention of this space, that we can recognize these rights and at the same time enforce them, and try to create them more dynamic, have them be alive. Because just as some experts mention, like Alda Pacio, she would say, while we don't make it live, we don't make it dynamic, these articles, these conventions, they will stay as a book, another book, as more pages to read. But it's a responsibility to be able to exercise our rights fully. So this will happen based on that recognition that we could have. So we are going to go to our break right now. We will be back at 8:42 local time. And before we go to the break, I would like to ask you if you have any questions, something that isn't clear to you that we can talk about before we go to the break. Anything you want to ask? Any doubts, comments? Anything that wasn't clear to you? No? Nothing? Okay. So we're going to go on a break right now. We're going to have 10 minutes. We come back at 8:43. We come back at 8:43. All right, well, enjoy. We'll see you in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. We are back. Thank you, everyone. So we're going to have a small activity right now. And we're going to we'll do a comparative analysis to help us go more in depth on this international instruments that we have. All the international instruments that we have, in one way or another, are being strengthened by each other. Or even there might be some international instruments that speak about this same right, but with certain particularity and special. So today we're going to do a relationship between the 169 agreement and Cedaw. So we're going to divide ourselves like we've always done. And the idea is that we can go make that relationship of what is happening with by Cedaw from Articles 5 to 16 and what the 169 agreement tells us, and see what are the similarities. Do they strengthen each other to defend our rights? Then we can also make a note of that. So for this, after it's going to do this relationship between Cedaw Articles 5 to 16, and then the 169 agreement with Articles 1 to 11. We're going to read them, and then we're going to do an analysis. For Latin America, you're going to still looking at Articles 5 to 16 from the Cedaw. And then from the agreement, you're going to look at Articles 12 to 22. In Asia, you're going to be looking, again, Articles 5 through 16 of Cedaw. And from the agreement, you're going to be looking at Articles 23 to 39. 33, I'm sorry, 23 to 33. So we're going to do the breakout rooms, facilitate you the documents. So we'll give you the agreement and Cedaw, and then you can do the analysis in your breakout rooms. We're going to take 25 minutes to be able to do this analysis, the relationship. And when we come back, we'll have a presentation based on this from your groups. So we'll do 25 minutes. So we're coming back around 9:15, please. So that we can have enough time to work on this. Any doubts still there from your instructions? We're going to read articles on the Cedaw and then the articles on the agreement and compare them. What are they similar in like? What are they, why do they look alike in? So for example, if article, let's for an example, let's say article 19.9 talks about political participation, and agreement 169 in article 15 also talks about political participation, we say, well, this happens. So that's the type of exercise that we're going to be doing. So if the agreement talks about something's different, if it talks about it is important to respect the people's own way of thinking, and Cedaw talks about the importance of the participation of in politics, then we can highlight that as well, so we can compare what's happening. So we're gonna compare articles and the concepts that is given. So that's the way I want you to exercise it. Like I mentioned, they all strengthen each other or broaden the knowledge of each other in order to protect our rights. So that's the work that we're gonna do. We're gonna give you 25 minutes in order to protect it. So we'll allow the team to please make the breakout rooms. Again, if you have any doubts, we're gonna be around the chat box listening in.
So how was it? Were we missing some time? Do we need a lot more time? Maybe give us a few minutes to discuss the recommendations. Asia and Africa, how did it go?
We didn't complete the discussion.
No,
Maybe give us another, maybe 10 minutes. Please.
we're gonna stop the exercise right here. We're gonna share where we have till now. And who wants to go first? The space is for you. This is to continue this to see this comparison, to see how far you got. No continent wants to speak today? You're all shy? Who wants to go first? All right, let's start with Asia. Let's see how
Okay,
far, wherever you got off, don't worry.
Okay, can I share?
Yes, please.
Yeah,
so
we were only able to do two. Like Article 23 of 169, it speaks about traditional livelihood. I think it we agreed that it relates with Article 14 of Cedaw on um rural livelihood. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Rural economic activities and rural survival. And also Article 24 of 169 that speaks on health relates with Article 12 of Cedaw on healthcare. Mm. Is it? Yeah, I think that was, and then education. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your work. And we realized that how there is an article. There's a relationship between these articles. To strengthen our rights. And as you can see during the duration of the course, you're going to be looking at how there's a relationship between different conventions and between other theories and other ways of working to continue analyzing the rights. So thank you very much. Let's continue with Latin America, please.
What was it?
Latin America. Dom, can you please go mute? Thank you. here where we're going to be sharing the screen is we needed some time to continue our discussion with the work. But in terms of rights, we can dialogue here. Yes, if you can share here. We managed to get this comparison, the key points from each agreement. In Cedaw, we saw that one of the principles is going to be on the inferiority, and that the state must ratify. Cedaw must take measures to eliminate discrimination against women, the trafficking, and take measures to eliminate political participation. Other key points are, well, they're all important, but we're talking about ensuring equality in conditions so that both women can also be representatives of our government, because many times in politics we've seen priority be given to the representation of men. It's been them who are in charge of the political life and all of that it means as a country. So many times we're going to see women look at inferiors, and we're not allowed to be involved in political life, and we can't be part of the decision making of leading a political life. This unfortunately is changing, with where things like Cedaw have played a role. Here in Mexico, for example, with the two of the main political representatives of the political party in our country are women. Another point here is ensuring women that in marriage doesn't imply that the nationality of the woman. There's something that called to our attention. That we still see women once a woman gets married, they get the first name of their husband, and that even now they can change their nationality. So this is weird for me. This is new to me, and it's an important point because we're capable of deciding if we want to or not acquire the last name of our husbands and preserve our nationality as well. Another key point is equality of rights in terms of education and to medical care, to access to land. Something that somebody rescued as well was the rural women, the part of the rural women participation as well, and the economic survival. And then when you take the measures in terms of the dispositions, so the role of women is important because many times they say that we don't work, that we should only be at home taking care of our children, taking care of the families. So it's an important point to be taken into account, that the house chores are important as well, and they need to be recognized as well. And then from the agreement 169, we talk about the respect towards indigenous towns, where the land, the respect that needs to happen to and protection for the rights of the indigenous people to have access to the lands. And we need to recover this point because indigenous people have a connection to our lands with the trees and nature, and we see that they play a key role in our identity. Another important topic here is be able to have the measure to be the same as other citizens. And this is something very interesting, and it has a lot of relationship with other points, to be able to ensure the conditions or positive conditions, mechanisms between the indigenous people to have access to basic education and to also have superior education, higher education, where we have the respect towards our rights. I don't know if any other of my peers want to add something else. Yes, I would like to add that, like Jesse mentioned in the last part, none of the articles talk specifically about indigenous women or even Black women or anything of the likes. What caught my attention was that rural women, that obviously original people from Black communities are also belong in rural areas, but how this can be visioned with the Organization for Labor because of the values that they have, the cultural values, economic values, the formation, training, preparation programs that are created should be based on on the values of the communities. That there is a relationship, a specific relationship in a topic, but just globally. So we have, Cedaw tells me that I have right to education, but it has to be an education that respects citizens of nationalities. So this education that you're giving me, I should be able to take based on my beliefs, based on my cultural respect and my tongue. So that's something that needs to be taken into account as well. So if somebody else want to talk about it and to add something else? Anybody else want to add something else? Somebody from this same group, if you want something else to be added or discussed? I think that all of the ideas were well represented here. We had difficulty to listen that last part. But yes, we'll continue with, if you can write down whatever else your idea that you wanted to share in the chat box so that we can all understand what you were trying to say. Something that you mentioned in the peers from Latin America were mentioning is that, right? When we read this, the agreement 169 relationship with Cedaw, we find out that both intertwine to be able to ensure all rights and one right specifically. So, for example, because Cedaw clearly speaks of the rights of women, but it's not specific of the differences or the different women that we are in the world. So it does not it doesn't have that capacity to respond to those specific in particular of each woman. That's something that is recognized by Cedaw, but also it is important to do this type of exercises to be able to relate one another, and also not only with the 169, but also with other documents that are important in order to see the necessities that we all have, that Indigenous women have. And this exercise can be done with the agreements against all types of races or racism. And this is another agreement that allows us to create this type of analysis. We got the Children's Convention as well that can help us make a relationship between those needs that the girls need, and especially the Indigenous girls have. So that's kind of the intention of what this exercise is done, for us to compare and to see the similarities and where do they strengthen each other and where they are lacking. So we now continue with Africa. So Africa, you're allowed to share now. What were your reflections?
Okay, in Africa, we didn't quite complete, but allow us to discuss, to mention what we discussed. The Africa group, I will mention some. Vivian and the others, please prepare to take over. So in Article 5, we discussed, we brainstormed, and we saw that this article has modified social and cultural patterns to conduct men and women, to eliminate the superiority of either sex. So we saw that this article was addressing those cultural practices that discriminate and violate the rights of women, like female genital mutilation or early marriages. So this article clearly states that all customary prejudices are eliminated, and every superiority is eliminated to treat men and women equally, even in the cultural eyes. Article B of 5 talks about family education, and it says that both the man and the woman have equal responsibility of raising their children. I remember when we were talking about the indigenous community, the oppression in the indigenous community, we realized that when we are doing awareness creation, most of the time the civil societies, what we do is we empower women on their rights. We train them on their rights. We do campaign on women rights. But actually, we realize now that even men need to be sensitized on the rights of women, children, and girls, so that this becomes a family thing, becomes a family value, becomes a family culture to respect the rights of the other, and to be aware of the existing rights of others. As I said, in other places, in other indigenous communities, women have no say over resources. Women have no say over the animals, like the cattle. For us, like the pastoralists, the women have no say over their cows, their goats, who will sell them, when they can sell them, when they can buy them. No, all those rights and privileges are left for men. So this article states that it is a family responsibility. and that they should cut across, not just rights, but all the way that women have rights, men have rights, children have rights, and it goes all the way even to their resources. Article 6 was talking about that, exploitation of women, especially in prostitution. And I was thinking of even in workplaces. Those people who are familiar with the Kenyan story, we've had a lot of outcry with Kenyans working in Lebanon and other Islamic countries. Let me just focus on Lebanon. Many Kenyans, young women have gone to Lebanon to work as house girls, as maids, and those kind of jobs. But some of them have come back home dead in coffins. And there's been an outcry about the abuse of women, Kenyan women in Lebanon and the other Asian countries. So this article addresses the exploitation of women and even leading women into prostitution. The last week, the government of Kenya offered a toll-free line for Kenyan women working in Lebanon. If for any reason a woman feels that her life is in danger or she's being exploited, then she calls a toll-free line that is linked to the government agencies. Article 7, when we were brainstorming, we thought Article 7 is talking about political participation in the public referendum. Just like a few years ago, Kenyans, was it 5 years? We did a constitution referendum and we voted for that. We voted to change the Kenyan constitution and everyone was involved. All women and men, all sexes were involved in that constitution referendum. So this Article 7 was very heavily on politics and governance. So women can participate in the elections and public referendum. And I agree that that is true. We have the freedom to vote in Kenya. However, freedom is always comes costly and slowly. I know some people, some women in some communities have to vote to the candidate of their husband or to the choice of their husband. They have a way of influencing women to vote for what they have. In fact, here in my village, I remember there was a time I was working as an agent, a political agent, just there in the polling station. And the woman will come with her ID, and when you ask her to select the candidate she wants, she tell you, my husband told me to select this candidate for member of parliament, for presidency. She already comes with a controlled mind of who she's going to vote. The husband has already influenced her who to vote for. In some cases, the husband will accompany the wife to the polling station, even to the polling booth, and take hold of her ID, almost voting for her. But as clerks, we were instructing to stand out and the woman to vote. But already her mind has already influenced. So this article was heavy on political, the formulation of government, the formulation of government policies, the function that it speaks that women have a right to participate in all government formulation and all government, they have a right to take all public offices and all governments, and even to represent the government outside the country. So this one was really heavy and it's good. And even in the discussion, I said that this is a big win for us because our member of parliament is a woman. She represents us in the national parliament, and that is an indigenous woman. So this is really, really huge. Article 8 was talking about equal terms again to represent the government in international organization or in international platform. And it's true, we can attest to that some women are ambassadors in Kenya. However, the number is not as high as those of men, but at least we can say that we have 2 or 3 women ambassadors. Article 9 says that it grants women equal rights to acquire or change their nationality. So this we could agree that this article took care that no woman is left with no nationality in case her husband changes nationality. It gives a woman, she has an equal right as a man to acquire a new identity or a new nationality. If she's married to a Mexican, she has a right to change if she wants, or remain a Kenyan, or even we now have a dual citizenship in Kenya. You can be a Kenyan and you can be a Mexican, and you still, they allow that dual citizenship. Even to the children born of Kenyans and different nationalities, they're allowed to have dual citizenship. Okay, I'll finish with this and then Vivian, you take over. Article 10 was heavy on education and the vocational, all about education. And this article from A to H, it was talking about that women and men have equal opportunities to education. When they are in the university or any educational establishment, women have a right to access the same curriculum as those of men. They have the right to acquire the same, the same scholarship or bursaries as men, So this one was cutting across all form of education, and it says that women have the same right as men. There's no superiority of the sexes when it comes to education. It also stated that women and men have equal opportunity in sports and physical education. I think you people, know that Kenyans are known for in the Olympics. We are known for the marathons. We are known for the long distance running. If you have seen those women, the Kenyan women running in those tracks, that is a testimony that we have equal opportunity with men in terms of sports and physical education. You have seen Kenyans winning, breaking world records in marathon and in Olympics, So these opportunities are given to both men and women. At that, I will ask my other friend to continue with Article 11 to 15.
Thank you, Esther, for sharing that with us. This progress that we see in the country. We still need to do more work to see that equality being seen that you were talking about, and especially how we can analyze and see those realities, and how we see progress in the last part you were mentioning about nationalities, that women have that right, but also children have the right as well to rescue that. So we're doing baby steps, and we're going little by little, but making progress. And I think that what we're missing is what has us here, and that's why we're having this space. We're sharing this space right now. We're going to have more spaces to continue talking about this. I would like to hear also about who are the ones in charge of speaking to make this happen. Like you all mentioned, Cedaw gives a certain parameter of how to reach this substantial equality between men and women, and between women. And for that, we have a committee of Cedaw, and Articles 17 to 22, they speak about this committee. And this committee is made up by 23 experts, and they're all nominated by their own states and also by civil society. And within those 23 people, there is one man. And that's always the way it's been worked. Why there's there always one man talking about women's rights? They never given us like a right answer or a proper response that is convincing for us, because we know that between the 23 people, there's always a man who's verifying what is going on within each country, and they have a mandate for 4 years, a 4-year term, and they have an interesting distribution when they're done, when they do these changes, because every 3 years they begin to change half of the members. So they change 11, and at some point they change 9, and this for the purpose of not changing them altogether, all 23 altogether. So the idea is that they can give continuity to whatever it is that they've been working or what they've been seeing during their evaluations. And this has been effective because you have sustainability guaranteed in the process that they're following in this space. This committee has its first session in 1982, and it regularly gathers in Geneva or New York. These are the countries for the United Nations is located, and they usually meet 2 to 3 times a year to check on reports. They're also the ones that create the calendar to see which country is in charge of accountability purposes of what's going on and within each of the countries. In Article 17, it speaks specifically about the roles that they have, and they talk about examining the progress that is being taken into account for the application of Cedaw by each state. Some mechanisms that they have is they do random testing on the reports that are done by each one of the states and civil society. They are examined by this committee. And also, they issue observations to each one of these reports, and they present them to the states with certain recommendations on how they can continue applying Cedaw, or how can they put attention to certain situations specifically. The committee also is in charge of checking and elaborating general recommendations, and here they speak of specific topics that needs to be with gaps within the articles that they've discussed in Cedaw, or an article that needs to be broadened. So these recommendations, when they're done, are based on the information that was presented or from civil society or from the state themselves to create these recommendations. There is a protocol. Here we talk about the procedures of investigations. This protocol is not ratified by the 186 countries that have ratified Cedaw, mainly because some say they have ratified the convention, but not the procedure on how to investigate, how to do the research on a specific cases or specific situations in certain countries. So that's why some countries in many states have taken their chance to approve that protocol that's handed out by Cedaw. And this is what gives Cedaw life. They can be independent, but it's better when we have these facultative protocols that allows to have certain parameters for research that can facilitate the work as a committee, and also the recommendations that they hand out as well. When we read articles 23 and 24, they speak of how to use other instruments, international instruments, and laws that already exist to be able to read together with Cedaw, which is the exercise that we just did a little while ago in groups. Here Cedaw also gives you this parameter where one can read and analyze with other instruments that are existent, whether it's conventions, treaty, or agreements that exist or that might come. Because we have human rights, and we also see the ones that need to be changed or modified. We need new laws to continue that was already there, allowing you to leave that opening to create that analysis and improvement. These are some of the other treaties that we discussed here. There's one against torture. There's one against racism. And it's very extensive to talk about analysis. We have a convention against racism, against children's rights, the one for migrating with people with disabilities, and for forces of, and these are all some of the main conventions that exist and created by the United Nations to continue working on this rights. We also have statements against Indigenous people. We talked about 169. We have regional agreements that exist, which were created to respond to the necessities of each one of the regions to continue working about fighting for rights and resolutions. There's a number of rights of instruments to continue responding to this need and protecting the rights. So we're also talking about they're particular, but at the same time, that speaks about women. Cedaw that speaks specifically of women. That is the Carta Magna, because they speak in generalities, but not in particular about women. Not like this one, not like Cedaw. And this is where we're going to be closing. It's articles 25 to 30 that talk specifically about how their procedures are established and how things are be ratified, how we discuss about their adhesion and the role of the convention as a whole. It's pretty much on Cedaw. And it's a bit more of the back office, the administrative side of it. And this is a little bit of what we're going to be seeing in the following weeks on our next session on Friday that we have the next class. And now we need to know what human rights are not expressed, what human rights are not established in Cedaw, and how we can be closing that gap. How can we continue about proposing, even Cedaw indicates that we can also making that vision more broad so that women are different, women has different needs, because women are growing in different environments. So we need to see how we can resolve these issues, these gaps that we have, that Cedaw has, so that all women are being represented. So today we've seen the Cedaw, how it is constituted, and how this document is so important for women, and how it gives next steps to speak about general recommendations that speaks of the rights of women, of children, indigenous women and children, and how this also comes to strengthen things that have been left aside. For example, we're talking about, Samai was talking about, the Tao doesn't speak about Black women, doesn't speak about indigenous women. So how do we propose within our realities this vision, and to make it more holistic and broad, and to take into account the things that are our rights as a whole. So I thank you all for this space that we've had today. And please, let's continue analyzing, and let's continue looking into the different exercises of comparing Cedaw to the Agreement 169. If we have the opportunity to read all of these treaties that we mentioned, to continue looking at our rights as a whole. So we'll stop here. We're in communications. So we've checked the modal, and where we have exercises there. We also have other materials for you to look into to help us strengthen our knowledge on this topic.